According to the most recent estimates, there are 7.9 billion people on the planet today. In 1951, the Earth's population was 2.5 billion. In the year 1000, that number was just 275 million. In many ways, it's difficult to visualize just how vast our population is today, and how fast it continues to grow. But there's one thing that we can be sure about. Population growth has a significant effect on our society. More people means more mouths to feed, more crowded streets, less available housing, and many other issues. But what is population growth doing to our minds? A scientist named John B. Calhoun asked himself this question and decided to create an experiment that would provide answers for us all. The results were incredibly disturbing, and the implications for the human race were obvious. This is the story of that experiment.
51 million people entering another
surveillance camera capturing the
unidentified flying
lockdowns and mass testing.
Today, that the world is going to end.
Born on May 11th of 1917, John Bumpus Calhoun grew up in Tennessee and became interested in animals from a young age. During his high school years, he studied birds and wrote his first published article at the age of just 15. He then attended the University of Virginia, earning his bachelor's degree in 1939. After transferring to Northwestern University, he studied rats for the first time, earning his master's degree and his PhD by 1943. After earning his doctorate, Calhoun remained highly involved with various universities as a professor, but in his spare time, he began creating rat utopias. His first was a 10,000 square foot pen with 5 healthy females. Calhoun understood that these females were theoretically capable of creating up to 5,000 rats. But the population never grew larger than 200. Calhoun made his first major discovery at this point. Only 12 rats could live harmoniously together in one group. Despite the fact that a larger colony was possible, the rats tended to group themselves into smaller clusters, living separately from the others. Calhoun then decided to push these experiments even further with the hope of making important discoveries about population-associated behavioral changes. In the 1960s, he created a new pen with 4 separate habitats, all connected by ramps. By all accounts, this pen was perfect, a rat utopia with unlimited food and water. But there was one factor that was not perfect: the population density. Because there were unlimited resources, the rats could breed with no restrictions whatsoever. This led to overcrowding, and eventually, certain changes in the population became apparent. This was the moment Calhoun coined the phrase behavioral sink. Essentially, this term refers to the fact that overcrowding can lead to the collapse of a society. But what does the collapse actually look like? Calhoun's rat study in 1962 makes it clear that unfettered population growth and behavioral sink have terrifying implications. One of the first things he noticed was that the infant mortality rate skyrocketed, reaching levels of up to 96%. Female rats also commonly died during pregnancy. Males began engaging in a range of strange behaviors, including frenetic overactivity, withdrawal, and even cannibalism. Some males only emerged at night, while others slept. It was at this point that Calhoun decided to take his experiment one step further, creating a new society to test his hypothesis of behavioral sink. But this time, he would experiment on mice instead of rats. In 1973, John B. Calhoun published Death Squared: The Explosive Growth and Demise of a Mouse Population. In this paper, Calhoun detailed a new experiment he had conducted with mice. Compared to his earlier rat study, the results were just as alarming, and they had incredibly disturbing implications for the human race. With backing from the National Institute of Mental Health, Calhoun built a new pen and introduced 4 breeding pairs of mice. These 8 mice entered a complete paradise with plenty of space and access to unlimited resources, but it would not last. As expected, these first mice bred rapidly, pushing the population to hundreds within a year. But then the population growth dropped rapidly, and after approximately 2 years, the mice stopped breeding altogether. There were 2,200 mice in the pen at this point. This puzzled Calhoun, because the pen could theoretically support about 3,800 mice. Along with the sudden decline in population growth, the mice began to behave much differently during this period. First, they lost the ability to care for their young. Males started engaging in homosexuality, while females became highly aggressive. Passive males simply allowed themselves to be attacked without trying to defend themselves. Soon enough, the population began to slide towards extinction. Females did not reproduce, and all males withdrew completely from society. The only thing that mattered was eating and drinking. At this point, Calhoun noticed that a new type of male had emerged, referring to them as the beautiful ones. These males engaged in obsessive grooming, and since they never engaged in fighting, their appearance was perfect. It was this new group of mice that brought about the extinction of the entire population. Eventually, the violent and cannibalistic generation of mice died out, leaving only the beautiful ones to live in a state of withdrawn apathy. Since these mice did not mate, they caused the entire population to die, although their final days were much less violent and disturbing than what they had seen before. Eventually, the last mouse died in the rat Utopia after about 3 years. Before this moment, Calhoun took some of the last remaining beautiful ones and released them into a new pen with new breeding partners. He hoped that they would snap out of their old behavior and start to procreate once again, but it was not to be. These mice continued to withdraw from society and eventually died from natural causes without breeding. In other words, the entire population was doomed, no matter what. It's clear that this experiment was pretty disturbing, but what does it actually say about human society? Calhoun suggested a number of important takeaways. First, he pointed out that a world without any problems might not be as perfect as we think. When there's no need to fight, work, or struggle to survive, life ceases to have a purpose. People stop caring, and in Calhoun's own words, the individual dies in spirit. Now, does that mean we need to return to the wilderness and start fighting with predators in order to keep our society from going extinct? I might agree, but Calhoun does not. He views the need to work in a very literal sense, and he compares it to the job market in human society. One of his big conclusions was that if there are too few jobs to fill and too many qualified individuals, chaos and alienation will follow, leading to a demise of the society. Calhoun also makes it very clear that human society could suffer the exact same fate as the mouse Utopia that had completely self-destructed. Pretty pessimistic, right? Well, no, not exactly. Calhoun didn't believe that his experiment predicted doom for humanity. Instead, he said that humanity had the wisdom and technology to reverse dangerous trends and avoid the same fate as his experiment. He did point out some areas of concern, however. In Calhoun's opinion, the greatest threat came from overcrowded cities and poor job markets, leading to overpopulation and a society full of people with no jobs or purpose in life. When Calhoun first published his paper in the 1970s, it was seen as highly controversial, and not everyone agreed with his conclusions. Many have pointed out that mice are not the same as human beings, and so the results of his experiments do not necessarily have implications for our society. Some have suggested that Calhoun's research was flawed, and that it didn't really study overpopulation, but rather isolation. These critics argued that isolation, not overpopulation, allowed aggressive males to claim territory and isolate pockets of mice, leading to the formation of the beautiful ones and ultimately extinction. Another researcher named Jonathan Friedman decided to run a similar experiment, but he used high school students instead of mice. He found that moral decay could arise from excessive social interaction, rather than population density. But aren't excessive social interaction and overpopulation two sides of the same coin? The truth is that our society might be headed in the same direction as Calhoun's mouse utopia. Our standard of living is better than ever, and many of us never have to worry about access to resources. But the more our population grows, the more isolated we seem to become. Many people have withdrawn from society, especially in an era where working from home is becoming increasingly common. Automation and other factors have led to a worrying future for our job market, and some people already find themselves without a purpose in society. What might happen if we continue down this path and our population continues to grow? Will humanity use its intelligence and technology to find a solution? Will we be forced to depopulate our own societies or colonize other planets? Or will we ultimately find ourselves on the road to extinction, just like the mice in Calhoun's experiment? At the end of the day, only time will tell, but look around and ask yourself this: does Calhoun's experiment seem at all familiar?